Kemudian untuk siapapun yang jadi host bisa tolong jadikan John-nya jadi host juga nggak, atau co-host biar bisa share screen. Terima kasih.
Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asrofil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina wa habibina wa syafi'ina wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain amma ba'du. Pertama-tama, marilah kita panjatkan puji dan puja syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala yang telah melimpahkan rahmat dan hidayahnya kepada kita semua, sehingga kita bisa berkumpul dan menghadiri kuliah umum dengan tema Climate Change and Mental Health. Tak lupa salawat serta salam kita haturkan kepada junjungan kita Nabi besar Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, yang kelak syafaatnya kita tunggu-tunggu di yaumil kiamah nanti. Amin amin ya robbal alamin. Yang terhormat Ibu Dr. Miwa Patnani MSI selaku Dekan Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi beserta jajarannya, yang terhormat Bapak Ibu dosen Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi beserta seluruh tenaga kependidikan, yang terhormat Ibu Fitri Arlin Kasari PhD selaku moderator pada kuliah umum hari ini, and I would like to welcome Mr. John Paul Cauchi PhD as our guest lecturer today. Kami ucapkan selamat datang di kuliah umum Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi dengan tema Climate Change and Mental Health. Sebelumnya, izinkan saya memperkenalkan diri terlebih dahulu. Saya Salsa Faiz Fadia selaku Master of Ceremony pada kuliah umum siang hari ini. Selanjutnya, izinkan saya untuk membacakan susunan acara pada kuliah umum hari ini. Agenda yang pertama akan ada pembacaan ayat suci Al-Quran, kemudian dilanjutkan dengan sambutan oleh Dekan Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi. Setelah itu kita akan memasuki sesi kuliah umum yang akan diserahkan kepada moderator. Selanjutnya akan ada sesi tanya jawab di akhir sesi pemberian materi, lalu diakhiri dengan penutupan dan juga pembagian tautan Google Form presensi untuk diisi oleh peserta. Sebelum memasuki rangkaian kegiatan yang pertama, marilah kita membaca basmalah terlebih dahulu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Baiklah, pertama-tama akan ada pembacaan ayat suci Al-Quran dan sari tilawah oleh Akila Faiza. Kepadanya tempat dan layar dipersilahkan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhalladzina amanu idza qila lakum tafassahu fil majalisi fafsahu yafsahillah. Wa idza qila inshuzu fanshuzu yarfa'illahu alladhina amanu minkum walladhina utul ilma darajat wallahu bima ta'maluna khabir. Yang artinya, wahai orang-orang yang beriman, apabila dikatakan kepadamu, berilah kelapangan di dalam majelis-majelis, maka lapangkanlah. Niscaya Allah akan memberi kelapangan untukmu. Dan apabila dikatakan, berdirilah kamu, maka berdirilah. Niscaya Allah akan mengangkat derajat orang-orang yang beriman di antaramu dan orang-orang yang diberi ilmu beberapa derajat. Dan Allah Maha teliti terhadap apa yang kamu kerjakan. Shadaqallahul azim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Akila Faiza atas pembacaan ayat suci Al-Qur'annya. Selanjutnya akan ada sambutan dari Ibu Dr. Miwa Patnani MSI selaku Dekan Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi. Kepada Ibu Miwa, waktu dan layar dipersilahkan.
Thank you, Salsa. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for being here with us today. It is such an honor for me to speak on behalf of the Faculty of Psychology to welcoming all of you to this guest lecture today. I would like to thank to Dr. John Paul Cauchi, I'm sorry if I didn't spell it correctly, for sharing with us today about climate change and how it affects mental health, which maybe we all now in Jakarta have this kind of experience with rain all day long these days. We know that when it rains in Jakarta, it means traffic jam, flood, delayed cancel this, cancel that, and so many other stressing experience following. I hope we will learn much more about it from this lecture, and we'll get some insight how to deal with it for our mental health. I also like to thank to Bu Inka, who have worked so hard and smart to carry out some of the faculty's program. With Bu Inka International Network, Bu Inka helped Faculty of Psychology to get closer to international accreditation. This guest lecture, I guess, is one of her contribution to our faculty. Thank you, Bu Inka, for your smart and hard work. And also, I would like to thank for all the staff, Pak Arif, Pak Bagas, Pak Johan, Bu Chandra, Mbak Lydia, and Mas Fadli, who have done a lot for this wonderful guest lecture. Thank you for all the invited guests. And of course, thank you for all the students of Faculty of Psychology who I assuming definitely coming to this guest lecture with great enthusiasm to learn something new. Hope we all get the very best experience today. Thank you. Have a great and happy time with this lecture. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bu Miwa atas sambutan yang telah diberikan. Setelah mendengar sambutan dari Bu Miwa, selanjutnya kita akan memasuki inti dari kuliah umum hari ini, yaitu pemaparan materi mengenai climate change and mental health yang akan dibawakan oleh Mr. John Paul Cauchi, PhD, dan akan dimoderatori oleh Ibu Fitri Arlinkasari, PhD. Sebelum menyerahkannya kepada moderator, maka izinkan saya untuk membacakan profil singkat dari beliau. Ibu Fitri Arlinkasari, PhD, atau yang kerap dipanggil Ibu Inka, merupakan salah satu dosen di Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Yarsi. Ibu Inka menyelesaikan pendidikan doktoralnya di School of Architecture and Built Environment, Queensland University of Technology. Beliau memiliki beberapa bidang keahlian, di antaranya adalah Environmental and Urban Psychology dan Participatory and Ethnical Research with Children. Saat ini beliau menjadi dosen pengampu utama di beberapa mata kuliah, salah satunya mata kuliah Psikologi Lingkungan. Baiklah, itu adalah profil singkat dari moderator kita pada kuliah umum siang hari ini, maka selanjutnya sesi kuliah umum akan saya serahkan kepada Ibu Inka. Kepadanya, waktu dan layar dipersilahkan.
Okay, thank you, Salsa, and everyone for coming to this guest lecture today, this afternoon. So this is Dr. John Paul Cauchi. I'm not sure if I spell it right as well, because I usually call him John because he is one of my PhD fellow when I was studying in QT, Queensland University of Technology. So John has a very massive background in health because basically he is a doctor, right? So, but now he is immersed himself in public health issues, and more specifically in the relations between climate change and health in general. So before, without further delay, I please welcome John to start the lecture. And maybe I should invite John to share his screen first so all of us can see it clearly. Please, John, time is yours. Thank you.
Sure. I will start sharing the screen. So let me see how I will do that. Just a second. Oh, can you all see the screen, please?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So good morning. My name is Dr. John Paul Cauchi. So none of you said it well, but that's perfectly fine. So first things first, I will be speaking in English. So if I go too fast, please do notify me and I'll try to speak slower. Okay. We have a lot of material to cover today, but I really hope it will be an inspiring and helpful lecture. So something small about my background. I actually trained to be a doctor and studied to be a doctor, but then I specialized in environmental health. And then I did my PhD in climate change and health, where I looked at food security issues, especially in Kiribati in the Pacific. So I will be looking through examples from both my home country, which is in Malta. In fact, here it is 7 o'clock in the morning, so we have quite a few hours away. And secondly, I'll be using also examples from Kiribati and especially from Jakarta and Indonesia, because there are so many examples to look at regarding climate change and health. Especially, I try to focus on mental health issues. So without further ado, let me start the presentation. Okay, so first things first, what is climate change? You know, we talk about climate change as being this way or that way, and climate change refers. It's a complicated sentence, but I want to explain it carefully. So it refers to a change in the state of the climate that can be identified. Okay, so this is important. Climate change is not weather change. It doesn't mean that today it's rainy, yesterday it was sunny, so it's climate change. No, climate change is when you look at the change in the average weather as it is taken over 30 years usually. So for example, if in our parents' time, that can be due to climate change. The climate has changed somewhat, you know, and that is what we're talking about. So I repeat, it is not, it was rainy yesterday, today it's sunny. No, it used to rain much more in the past, or it used to be sunnier in the past, and now it rains much more, or it is more sunny. Okay. So when you look at this graph over here, you're seeing down there, you're seeing the years on the x-axis and the temperatures on the y-axis. And as you can see, the temperatures are rising. Okay. So over time, we see the temperatures rising. And could I just ask all of you please to turn your mics on mute so that we don't distract each other. So over time, the temperature has been increasing and is now about 1.27 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Okay, by pre-industrial levels, I'm referring to the temperature as it was 200 years ago on average worldwide. Now, people might say, oh, but you know, that doesn't sound like a lot. What is 1.2 degrees? This is a global average. Okay, so we're saying on average, the whole world, the temperature has increased by about 1.27 degrees since the start of the Industrial Revolution, about 200 years ago. Okay. We also know that humans are the primary cause of this warming. As you can see over here, so here there are two charts that I'm showing. To your left, you have a chart showing what we've observed. And to the right, what we do is we get models. Okay, we get lots of data and we plug them into massive computers and leave them running for weeks. Okay, and then you get an idea of what's going on. So to your right, the yellow shows what we've observed, shows what happens with warming. Okay, the warming we've observed in the past 200 years. But then the blue beneath it shows how climate would have changed if it weren't for humans. You know, because we know that climate change is being caused because of human fossil fuel emissions. And you can see over here that there's quite a difference. Okay, what we're showing there that if we remove the human pollution, emissions we're putting due to our cars, due to our burning of fossil fuels, our power stations, etc., any warming at all. You can see it over there in the blue. Okay, but above it, the observed shows what we observed. So humans, because of climate change happening today, and this is very worrying. Another concept I'd like to introduce to the class over here. Okay, we have what that is called a donut chart because it looks a bit like a donut, but I want to explain what it is. On the outside over here, you have what is called an ecological ceiling. Okay, they are activities which we cannot go beyond. Once you go beyond them, you start causing problems to our environment. Okay, so I have an ecological ceiling. Beneath it, there is a social foundation. Okay, over here. So that is basically we want to assure that everybody has access to water, to food, to health. Okay, so this is a just society, and we need to live between. We need to live between the ecological ceiling and the social foundation. If we have a shortfall, if we go below the social foundation, people do not have enough to survive with or to live comfortably with. And if we go beyond the ecological ceiling, we're causing damage to our world. We're causing damage to the environment with all the problems that come with it, okay? And in fact, today, we'll be mostly focusing on climate change as one of the overshoots, one of the problems that human society and civilization is causing, okay? And the effect that that can have on the social foundation, especially looking at energy, water, food, and health. But as you can imagine, that goes also with all the others. Of course, climate change is this thing that affects everything, okay? In fact, internationally, it's being seen as one of the biggest public health and mental health threats today. Okay, the Lancet is a very important journal in medicine and in health, and they are calling it one of the biggest threats facing public health and mental health in the world today. So, we already have determined that climate change is being caused by people. Okay, that means that we are the ones that can solve it. Okay? So we know that there are two scenarios we can go with. There are many, but let's look at two ones. If we do not change our way of life, if we do not change the level of pollution that we are emitting in the atmosphere, we will keep on having a temperature rise. And I want to assure you that would be a nightmare scenario, because the more temperatures increase, the faster change happens. Okay, it is not a linear response, it is an exponential response. Okay, so the world that we're seeing at 1.2 degrees centigrade will not be twice as bad at 2.4. It will be 50 times as bad at 2.4. It will be 100 times as bad at 3 degrees centigrade. Okay, so the changes that we see in temperature lead to far more drastic changes in the world around us. The other scenario is that we manage to cut our carbon emissions and we keep temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade. Okay? Currently, we're going somewhere between the two. In fact, right now, we have already reached 1.2 degrees centigrade. You can see over here where it is we are here. Okay? In the Paris Agreement of 2015, we said that we'll try to stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade, but not more than 2. Okay? But currently, we are going to 2.7. This is very worrying because 2.7 is a very bad scenario. Okay, if we start working harder to lower our climate emissions, we can stay below 2 degrees centigrade, which is considered, it is still very dangerous, but it is considered manageable. Okay. Now, another thing to show you is, has climate change happened in the past? Yes, it has happened without people, but it has happened on a far slower time scale. Okay, and I want to show you some examples. So over here, we know that in the last ice age, okay, that is about 20,000 years ago, there was so much ice in the world, okay, that basically the ice sheets that are now in Greenland used to reach all the way down to New York. So if you went to New York 15,000 years ago, there would have been 1 kilometer of ice on top of us. Okay. Similarly, because the ice obviously stays on, it basically freezes, you know, the sea levels dropped. So sea levels were about 120 meters lower. In fact, you could walk all the way to Vietnam from many parts of Indonesia, for example. In Malta, for example, you could walk to the mainland of Europe. We are a small island nation, but at the time, we could walk to mainland Europe. And we have lots of evidence for this, because, for example, you find dwarf animals or skeletons of animals that used to exist on the mainland, or, for example, in other places that are found on islands. The only way they could have got there is not by swimming, because elephants, for example, can't really swim across the sea, but they got there because the sea levels rose and they were trapped. Okay. To your right over here, I want to show you over here, we have carbon dioxide and temperature. Okay, and this measurements go back to 800,000 years. You may ask yourself, how do we know how temperatures were so far long ago? With science, you can, because you can see the different isotopes of carbon, you can see the different carbon dioxide levels trapped in the ice, and you can see how it was 500,000 years ago, for example. And you can see over here, there is a real correlating pattern. Okay, so as carbon dioxide levels increase, temperatures increase. When they drop, they drop. Okay, and you can see over here, look at the difference. Okay, can you see on the top right where there's Antarctica? Basically, look at how carbon dioxide levels have spiked in such a short time. That is because of humans. Okay, so we are responsible for the climate change we're seeing today. This corresponds also to Greenland. You can see the pattern right over there. Okay, so if 4 degrees centigrade one way led to an ice age, what can 4 degrees centigrade, let's imagine a bad scenario, a 4 degrees centigrade, what will it lead to? We do not know. Okay, so over here 1 AU is basically saying an ice age equivalent unit. So 1 AU is 4 degrees centigrade colder. Okay, so 0 degrees is practically the average during the modern times. We are a bit above that already, as you can see over here where we are today. But a 4.5 degrees centigrade the other way meant you had basically 1 kilometer of ice on top of New York, for example, just to give you an idea. Sea levels were 120 meters lower. Okay, 4.5 degrees centigrade the other way is going to cause a total disaster because sea levels will rise, as we're going to look into today, and we're going to explore many of the problems. Okay, the world has gone to 8 degrees colder once, or twice, or 3 times. Millions, I'm talking hundreds of millions of years ago. That is, mammals didn't exist at the time. Humans didn't exist at the time. Okay, 2 degrees the other way, basically it is a world we can't even recognize. Okay, so we need to stay towards 0 degrees centigrade. Why? Because that is where human civilization developed. Our complex societies that we see today exist because the climate allowed it. If we go too hot, it might not allow it. Okay. Another concept I want to introduce is climate change is a wicked problem. What is a wicked problem? A wicked problem I'm going to quote over here. There are problems that scientists and engineers, so usually scientists and engineers look at the problem, a simple problem. Okay, I want electricity from water, I build the dam. Okay. However, with wicked problems, you can't do that because wicked problems, you pull one string, you change the other. Imagine a big net. Okay. If I pull one part of the net, the whole net moves with it. If I move another part, the other part moves with it. Okay, so this is a problem because, of course, climate change, if we try to tackle climate change, we're going to affect many different systems. Okay, so it's important for us to understand this concept because for mental health, as we're going to see, the changes that we can get, that the changes that we do, if they're bad changes, they can cause harm. But if they're good changes, they can cause benefits over the whole system. Okay. There also is the tragedy of the commons. So over here, the tragedy of the commons is when short-term self-interest leads to tragedy for all. Okay. So some countries in the world have polluted more than others. All the other countries say, hey, they polluted, so why can't I? Everyone pollutes and everybody suffers. Okay. Here there is an example with water, for example. If everyone pumps water from the same borehole without any regulation, and to fill their pools, to throw it in the streets, whatever, okay, then in the end, no one will be left with water. And this is the tragedy of the commons. Okay, and we see it a lot in the environment. So we're moving now into climate change and health. How does climate change affect health? Okay, so it does so through complex and multiple pathways. Okay, the World Health Organization estimates that an additional 250,000 deaths per year will happen directly due to climate change, due to malaria, malnutrition, diarrhea, and heat stress. This is probably an underestimate. We probably will have much higher figures, but currently we know that that is what we can expect at this point. Okay, the effects are felt strongly in all countries, but disproportionately so in poorer countries. Why? Because they might not have the infrastructure to cater for the problems that climate change will bring. Okay, climate change, we also need to see these links. Climate change, vulnerability within a country, and how that affects climate-sensitive health risks. Okay, so vulnerability looks at exposure pathways. So, for example, are we prepared to deal with the high temperatures? Are we prepared to deal with sea level rise? What about our food? What about water quality, etc., etc.? Start thinking about how this affects Indonesia. We'll be looking at some examples in the coming slides. All right. And these vulnerability factors, such as demographic factors, socioeconomic, political, etc., have a link with exposure pathways. And also, on the other end, our health system. Okay, so if, for example, there is frequent flooding of a road and ambulances can't pass, okay, because of climate change, this is causing a health problem, and so on and so forth. To make it simple, we categorize climate change and health impacts. There are many ways of doing this, but the one way I'm going to show you is through these risk categories. Okay, so we call them primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay, so primary are, it is hot and it is affecting my health. Okay, it's really hot and I'm not feeling well today. That is a primary effect. Okay, or air pollution, for example, which climate change has an impact on. A secondary effect would be climate change has caused heat to destroy my crops, or has caused a drought and I can't find water. These effects. Okay, so it is an indirect effect, but it is actually very prevalent. Okay, and we see them in the world around us today. And tertiary effects, that is where mental health comes in. Okay, we start worrying, oh my God, there's climate change. I can't get my food anymore because the prices have gone up because of the heat. The heat is affecting my parents' health. With our air conditioning is not working. You know, it's too hot. The air pollution is so bad today. That is where mental health comes in. It also includes other problems. So, for example, with sea level rise, people will be displaced internally, so they might need to move to another place or another country. Okay, you could also get conflict. If countries are fighting over water, they might they share a water supply. That water supply goes, they might start a war about it. Okay, so there are all these problems. So you have primary, secondary, and tertiary, and we're going to go through them together. Okay, think of them as primary, secondary, and tertiary, one circle within the other, and they all affect each other. Okay, so let's look at the first here, the direct effects. Okay, so air pollution. So air pollution happens because of various things. Some of it is natural, but a lot of it is now human caused. You can all know this. There's car traffic, there's burning of fossil fuels, there's burning of material, okay, there's burning of waste, and this causes air pollution. However, climate change can make it worse. And that makes it worse this way because of ozone. Okay, so we've all heard about the ozone layer. There's a nice ozone layer and a bad ozone layer. The nice friendly ozone layer is high above in the atmosphere. Okay, that protects us from harmful UV rays on the sun. So that is our friend. We should leave it over there. Okay, but ozone in the low zone, ozone where we breathe, ozone is actually toxic to human health. Okay, and what happens is that you've got a cocktail of pollutants in the atmosphere, literally a cocktail of them. What happens is that because of increased heat, this cocktail reacts with oxygen to form ozone, and ozone causes a lot of harm to our breathing, to our lungs. Okay, it also is produced next to bare electrical supplies. Okay, but that is a small amount compared to what happens in our cities. So I don't want to point my finger at any place. Malta has a lot of air pollution problems, but I want you to think about this, how it would affect your mental health. If in the morning you're in Jakarta, you're maybe going down from the hills and you see a layer of smog, and you start saying, oh my God, I'm going to breathe that air. Okay, think about the mental health effect that has on you and the psychology of people. And air pollution has more effects than just, direct health. It makes us more tired. We don't feel as healthy. We don't feel inspired at work. It causes work stress, all these things. Okay, so think about how vulnerable we are to the air we breathe. In fact, here I took some examples from Jakarta. There's a very good series of articles I have in the slides. If they're shared with you, you will have the sources for these. Okay, these articles written by Kate Walton about Jakarta. There's a series of them. And here, Jakarta's air quality kills its residents, and it's getting worse. Okay, so right now, research from the University of Chicago shows that Jakarta's air quality is now so bad that it's making our lives shorter. Okay, so on average, it takes almost 2.5 years off the average life of a resident of Jakarta. Okay, this is a very serious problem. And you can see over here to our right an example of the traffic, an example of the sun. Okay, so I'm showing you all this not to make you feel, oh my God, this is such a big problem and it's depressing. But I want you to think about how we can solve it. Okay, so we're going to give some examples of that. Another effect is heat waves. Okay, so over here we have high temperatures, and that is causing effect on our health immediately. And I want to stress here. I had a clip, but to show you over here, but I've actually it's in the slides, but I'm not going to show it here today simply because the English in it might not be that clear to understand. Okay, but I want you to think about how sometimes the media talks about this problem, because for example in Europe when there's a heat wave, some parts of the media try to make it seem like, oh, but it's sunny, it's nice, okay, but it actually is not sunny and nice. We might not be adapted to the hotter temperatures that we see today. Okay, so for example in the UK, look at these charts over here. I'd like to explain them a bit. In the UK, first look at the bottom left over here. England recorded 2,800 excess deaths in over 65 in 2022 heat wave. Okay, so last summer, London had temperatures of over 40 degrees centigrade for the first time in its history. Okay, now in London, which is used to be cold and so on, people don't have air conditioning. Okay, so their houses are really poorly insulated. So as a result, when it was hot, they had nowhere to go. They had nowhere to go. Okay. In fact, these charts over here to the right show some European cities, and let me explain them. They're very interesting charts. So on the x-axis, you have the temperature. On the y-axis, you have the relative risk of dying. Okay, so let's look at this example in London. At an average temperature of 3 degrees, we expect the relative risk of dying to be about 1.2. So that means that 20% more people will die on average when the temperature is 3 degrees. When it is 20 degrees, it is the one we're comparing it to. Okay, so 20 degrees is if 1,000 people die at 20 degrees. At 3 degrees, we expect 2,400 deaths to happen. Okay. Similarly, if we keep going on the cold temperature at -5 degrees centigrade, we expect a twofold increase. We expect 4,000 people to die every day. Okay, these aren't just throwing figures up in the air. This is data over many, many years. Okay, so we see this pattern. Look at the hot temperatures. At temperatures of 30 degrees, we expect over 2,500, over 2.5 times the number of deaths we'd expect at lower temperatures. Imagine at 40 degrees how this could go on. Okay, you can also see how different cities are adapted. I do not have a chart for Jakarta, but it would be interesting to see it if we did. So, for example, in Stockholm, they're very well adapted to cold temperatures. So you can see here there's almost no difference. Okay, Madrid, the chart is a bit flatter. Okay, because they're better adapted, and with Rome, they're more adapted to warmer temperatures. Okay, so you can see every city, every place has its own adaptation. Jakarta probably would be quite well adapted to hotter temperatures, but then it would increase suddenly after a certain number. Okay, so keep these things in mind. Every location has its own adaptation, and every location has its used habituation. So, you know, people in London would find in places in Indonesia to be really hot. If you go to London, you will probably be covered in a sweater because it's very cold. Okay, so we're all adapted accordingly. Hot temperatures also accelerate drought. And I'm going to show examples from Europe and China over here. This year, last summer was unprecedented. Okay, so that is the Loire River in France. And you can see over here, you could walk across it. Okay, you can see over here to the bottom left, 2021 versus 2022 France. And you can see a satellite photo showing how much drier France was in 2022. Parts of it look like a desert. Okay, in China, they had the worst heat wave in history. In history, the worst ever recorded. Okay, over there, you see that photo on the bottom right, where there is that temple. That temple is usually on an island. Look at how the lake dried up. Okay, so things are getting worse, and we're only at 1.2 degrees centigrade. God only knows how it will be at 2.5, 3. Okay. In fact, let me give you another. This is a direct effect, but also slightly indirect. So imagine you're in France. France gets most of electricity from nuclear power plants. Okay, so from nuclear power, you need a lot of cooling water for that. But what happened? The rivers dried up. They couldn't cool the power plants. They had to turn them off. Otherwise, it would cause a disaster. Okay, so power supplies go down. The prices of electricity goes up. And look at the effect that has on people. You know, they mightn't be able to turn on their air conditioning units, or they mightn't afford it. The temperatures are hot. How is that going to affect the elderly? So there are all these problems. You have to think of, this is why it's a wicked problem. The river dries, power supply, can't cool my house down, air conditioning goes off, mental health effects, how does it affect elderly? You know, all these complicated effects, okay? Climate change can have knock-on effects, many of which we do not necessarily think about, okay? A question to ask yourself is, as the UK warms, and in this case I wrote the UK, but I want to think of also Indonesia, enters a warmer climate regimen, do you think Indonesian housing on average is adapted to extreme heat? Think about your homes. And this is just one example. Those are anomaly charts. They show you how much hotter the temperature was compared to normal. Okay. And over here, this is in winter. This is this winter in Europe. Okay. Temperatures were about 16 degrees warmer in, for example, Germany and Poland than they usually are. Look at how alarming that is. I tried to find charts for Southeast Asia, but I couldn't find reliable ones. So forgive me if I'm using Europe as an example over here. Lots of stuff being thrown at you here, but these are estimates from the International Panel of Climate Change. So this is a document written every 7 years that shows what we expect from climate change with the latest models, okay? And I want you to look up hot temperatures over land, so up here, please. And I want you to look at 50-year event. A 50-year event is basically hot temperatures happen every so often. Okay, and the 50-year event would be something which happens only every 50 years on average. Okay, at 1.5 degrees centigrade, a 50-year event from our previous climate would happen about 9 times more often. At 4 degrees centigrade, it happens every summer, every 2 years. Okay, so can you imagine what our parents' generations experienced once every 50 years? We would experience it once every 2 summers. Can you imagine the impact on us, on our way of life? To the right over here, and I want you to look at over here, the Southeast Asia region. Okay, in the Southeast Asia region, that shows that we're observing an increase in hot extremes, and the 3 dots means that we're very confident that it's happening due to climate change. Okay, and note that it's all over the world. Okay, the gray ones over there that you're seeing are because we don't have a lot of data, because they're in remote parts of the world. Okay, but you can see that the science is there, it's undeniable. Okay, in the same way, you can see with drought and with heavy precipitation. Both drought and heavy rain happen because of climate change, because what happens is things go from one extreme to another. Okay, these are increasing in frequency. Southeast Asia, we do not have yet enough data, because these things, as you can imagine, require a lot of data. But in many parts of the world, for example, my part of the world, the Mediterranean over here, MED, we are experiencing more droughts than usual. Allergens, this is another one people do not think of, okay? We have longer growing seasons. You might have noticed that flowering might happen at a different time. Although in Indonesia and the tropics, this is not very distinct, but in parts of Europe, yes, you can see these. And even in parts of other regions like in New Zealand, etc. What happens is we have longer growing seasons because it's hotter. We get more pollen, more allergens, and that means that people have more allergies. And this is a big problem because, of course, it affects our way of life a lot. No? You can think of, is it related to mental health? Well, if you keep going to work with a blocked nose and you feel that you can't speak properly, etc., this will be a problem. Okay. Questions to reflect on. How will extreme health affect our communities? Think of your immediate community. With added stresses on our infrastructure and communities, what are the mental health implications of added discomfort and direct danger to health? Imagine that there's a heat wave The power goes off, and your parents can't cool down, and they're vulnerable people. How would you feel about this? Okay, your family, your community, how would you feel about this? We now move to the second tier. Okay, so we're going to look now at how climate change affects something that could affect our health. Okay, our mental health as well. So I want to show you an example in Kiribati. Kiribati, it's spelled Kiribati, but it's pronounced Kiribati. Kiribati is in the Central Pacific. It's one of the smallest nations in the world. And I went there. They are atolls, they're very low-lying islands. And when I went there, I witnessed some things that were quite shocking. Because what happened was that one day there was a high sea level rise event. The sea levels rose and destroyed many crops. Okay, so to the left over here, we have a breadfruit tree and a papaya tree to your lower right. It's not that clear. That photo to the left was taken by myself one day after the sea rose and destroyed the crops underneath them. Okay, so there's a lot of salt basically in the soil. And then that photo, same place, was taken 1 week later. Okay, so it shows that the breadfruit tree has no more leaves, they all died off. And the papaya tree actually is dead. The breadfruit tree recovered because it rained very heavily, but they lost the food supply. They couldn't get their food from the breadfruit tree. So I asked the people, what will you eat? And they said, oh, we will eat rice. We'll buy rice. But rice cannot grow in Kiribati. So they have to spend money to get their food, whereas before it was growing on a tree. Secondly, breadfruit is much healthier than rice. So you start getting problems long term, like diabetes, like high blood pressure. So we see how health problems happen due to the food security problems that are caused by climate change. Okay. Similarly, obviously that has an impact not only on the person, but on the whole family. You start worrying about the person, their health isn't that great, their diet isn't that good, and all these problems. In fact, what I saw in Kiribati is that people were shifting to buy imported food. And the imported food is of very low quality usually, because it has to travel all the way across the Pacific. Okay. So it's cheap, it's poor quality, people's diet suffers as a result, etc. In fact, Kiribati has among the highest levels of diabetes in the world. Okay, you can see it's number 2 on this list, next to the Marshall Islands in the Western Pacific over here. Okay, Indonesia is not included in this chart, but it probably is pretty high as well. Okay, because Indonesia would be in another region of the Pacific. So climate change is a driver of food insecurity, leading to health consequences. Here's another way of showing it. We have the effects of climate change, direct effects: erratic season, extended drought, sunshine and heat. This leads to food security problems such as crop failure, unstable crops, difficulties in agricultural work. Think of all the people in Indonesia working on rice paddies, for example, exposed to extreme heat. It will affect their productivity. It will affect their mental health, their well-being. Okay, and that, of course, food insecurity leads to problems in birth weight, maternal energy, and burden of disease. And these are all problems that we're seeing. That is a really interesting study, by the way. It's done in Uganda, but you find many of the problems to be quite similar worldwide, to be honest. So, how does mental health affect our food crops? And I'm not exaggerating. Thousands of people are dying. Tens of thousands of people are dying because of climate change, which we do not really make an association with. In India, when there is a massive drought, we get tens of thousands of farmers committing suicide. Why is this? Okay, because what happens is they have a lot of stress. They can't feed their family. In their culture, they take it as a disgrace, a dishonor that they are not able to feed their family. They're not able to make a living. And many of them don't have any mental health support. So what do? They end up committing suicide. It's shocking. 60,000 people, 60,000 farmers in India committed suicide. And I think it was 2 years ago, there was an event of a drought. 60,000 people committed suicide. Similarly, over here, for example, that was in Tamil Nadu, agitation of Tamil Nadu farmers for 100 days. The farmers protest because they can't take it anymore. The government is not helping them. You get loss of self-worth. You get severe psychological impact on livelihoods of farmers coming from all this. And the whole community is affected. It's just one farmer. All of them are affected. Farmers do not feel empowered to change, partly due to socioeconomic conditions, And partly because they don't have assistance from the state. Okay, and food is also an important part of cultural life and expression. So in Kiribati, for example, people would tell me, I want to eat breadfruit, but I can't, it's small, it doesn't grow as well anymore. So I have to get rice. Imagine in a festivity, and you eat food that is not cultural. How would affect your villages? In Malta, we have village festivals, for example. If we can't get some of the food in the festival, how will it affect us this year? You're like, oh, things are changing. It's not the way it used to be. But this has an effect on our well-being. You can think of some examples in Indonesia as well. I'm sure you have. Imagine a big festivity that you would have over there, and some of the food items that you could have, like pandan, for example, or things that are not there. What do you do? Fine, you can get an imported product, but it's not the same, is it? Water security. Okay, so as temperatures increase, we get drastically different and worsening effects on water. We'll get extreme floods, we'll get extreme droughts. Okay, our water evaporates more quickly because of the heat. That's what happened in the Loire and other places. In many parts of the world, the snow doesn't fall and doesn't stay on the mountaintops. And as a result, in the summer, the water dries up because there's no snow melt to feed our rivers. Okay, what happens to the millions of people downstream? What happens to transport? Okay, what happened in Europe is that because there's also the war in Ukraine, right? So what happened is that many places in Europe switched to coal, for example, because they couldn't get gas. But what happened was that because the rivers were low, the barges on the rivers couldn't carry the coal to where it needed to go. So prices increased and increased and increased. Trains had to be used. People couldn't travel as frequently because the trains were being used to transport cargo, not people. So you can imagine all these effects. All right. Last year, Pakistan, 1/3 of the country was underwater. 1/3 of a country. Can you imagine if 1/3 of Indonesia is underwater? But not for a bit, for months. Okay, look at the effect that would have. Think of also effects like sea level rise, unseasonality, extreme rainfall, disease, etc. All these have an effect on our water supply. Australia, for example, had lots of problems last summer. Okay, we had massive flooding. I always joke, it's a bit of a sad joke with my friends, but when I went to Australia, it was a massive drought. I think I would remember how it used to be with the bushfires, and we'd see the horizon turning brown, okay, in some parts of the year. But when I left, the rain started happening. Heavy rain. Okay, entire villages were destroyed, entire towns were destroyed, communities cut off. All these have an effect on one another. So floods cause damage to crops, a decline in environmental quality, rural exodus. We talked about agricultural labor availability, food production. That has a poor, if we don't have access to food, that would have an effect on our food and well-being. We might even get starvation. Our household income may decrease. Our social network would be affected. So these are the down effects that would be the tertiary effects, the climate change effects on mental health, for example. Closer to home, let's look at Jakarta over here. So Jakarta, as we know, as you probably know, is sinking. It is the fastest sinking city on Earth. And that's because of two problems. One of them is groundwater extraction, which is not controlled. Okay, so as groundwater is extracted without control, literally the land starts sinking. Okay, at the same time, you have sea level rise happening. So it literally is a case of if it was like this, now this is happening. Okay, the land is sinking, the sea is rising. How is that going to affect the millions and millions of people who live in Jakarta? Okay, it might be an overwhelming problem. Maybe we do not want to think about it, but we need to think about it because it is our city. It's the way it's where we're living. It's where millions of people are living. How will it affect the psychology of people? To be at the edge and see their homes washed off. Okay. In Java, water is running out. Some of the worst water shortages are felt on Java, Indonesia's most populous island, home to more than 60% of the population, many of its largest cities. For all this human abundance, Java is seriously lacking in water, holding just 10% of the nation's water supplies. Okay, Java's water levels will drop to 476 meter cubed of water per person per year by 2040. The current annual level is 1,269. Okay, so there still is time. Okay, but the ideal per capita is 1,600. So we're already below, and we're going to go drastically below. How will that affect our way of life? What if I can't do my washing? What if I can't do my cleaning? What if I can't drink? What if I can't enjoy my time? You know, these will have an effect on our communities. So my point, and it sounds drastic, but we need to spell it out here. You adapt or you fade. Okay, cities have been abandoned in the past. We all know about abandoned cities in the past. You can look at so many of them in world history. Okay, and do we want places like Jakarta to be abandoned? Because it can happen. You know, that photo is from Jakarta. I found that photo in Jakarta from some of the neighborhoods that are permanently flooded. How will this affect our communities and poverty and mental health? Also, because the rising sea levels are happening, the water tables are being contaminated with pollution, with salt. Okay, that will have an effect on our health. Okay, and the fact 90% of households are using groundwater in Indonesia. I saw this problem in other places as well. In Kiribati, I remember the water in some places was yellow. It was so contaminated, it was yellow. Okay, it looked like urine, and people drink it and shower in it because they have no other option. How will that affect their health and mental health? I want to show you a small clip over here to show you what the effect of sea level rise. I think there will be captions, so please pay attention. It's a 4-minute clip, but it's a very important one. This shows Kiribati. Think of so many islands in Indonesia which will also suffer the same fate. I think there's a setting I need to do to share the sound in share screening. Just a second. Let me try to do that. So advanced sharing options. Okay. Just a second. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I'm sorry about this. I'm trying to resolve this problem. Does anyone know how we can share the sound on the video?
Maybe,
please?
John, you can simply open your YouTube and you can share screen the.
Yes, that is very true. That is a very good suggestion. Thank you. So just a second. So this is. Excellent. So let's do this. Let's see if it works. I'm afraid the sound is. I think it is a sharing option on Zoom.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Arif can help.
Okay, John,
Share sound.
you can
Share sound.
you can
okay.
click.
Yeah.
Okay, the sound's good.
Okay, excellent. So let's start.
Sa kunan kato katiyak ubos.
Ako wadi jarat pa mon miaka daw miaka itandak sesari mai di nano di tinwo di tay oman daus kan ya bakal tarik lang ako wan daus ya bakal tarik pakai mo kawayan kana kaya aga kawayan ya kana kata-kata kau kurang aja kayak gua anak orang.
Kaya kumusta? Tapayari ito katino yung tepon ay tayo dikin nga pongina sus ari toni pi tangiya pa nakikita kaya pusinta nakon tayo kanaro nga siyando.
For me as a Kiribati, the only thing that I want is to save Kiribati. It's not just about being alive and have a place to stay. No, it's about a country and a people called Kiribati people. We will continue to fight until there is no breath in us. These are the issues that Kiribati people are facing right now. First one is water. A long droughts and no water to drink, and places where the water is being contaminated by sea surge or rain, too much rain or flooding. So we implemented water tanks. We've also been helping with the coastal erosion. We've been planting mangroves and helping the people to understand why mangroves are important and why they shouldn't be taking sand from the seashores.
The community kay nakakawayo. Kaya natabuan niya mayo. Enang kay meloto na ibukin ka. Di bukan totoo natin anak ang bitagin ka noon pong. Di tuwa na may di Jakarta buang kay anakin di kita no medya may magtanak.
In food security, we've been telling people, go back to your Kiribati traditional crops. Return to your land and grow food.
Paiputina pa kinaiya di kikain rorong.
And if climate change is going to take away my sovereignty as a country, as a people, then everyone that is part of Kiribati and part of these countries that are facing the problems today, we will continue to fight. We're going to speak, we will continue to advocate, we will continue to shout and scream until they say, yes, we can do something and we can come to a binding agreement.
So you can see over there how island nations across the Pacific are being affected, and there are so many of these particular stories around the world. And I want to share with you, before we move on, how I once went to one of these islands in Kiribati, and I asked an elderly lady, I asked her, what do you think about moving from here because of the sea level rise? And she said, it haunts me, she said, if I move from my country, where shall we dance? Because in their world, in their culture, as in many parts of the Pacific, including Indonesia, dance is such an important part of connection to the land, of their community, And if you lose that, if they lose their land, what do they do? Where do they go? So these are big problems that we're seeing over here. I will continue with the presentation. So let me share the screen again. Excellent. Okay, so we now go to indirect effects. Okay, as we said, this time it's infectious diseases. So I want to show you some examples. Okay, first I want to show examples of diseases that are spreading in places where they didn't used to be. And that is in Europe, for example. We have the West Nile virus. It is a virus that is spreading. Why? Because mosquitoes that before used to die in the cold are now surviving. So we've seen this from Egypt and other regions. There are also other places. For example, in the US, we have some mosquitoes which are moving into warmer regions, okay, into colder regions, sorry. You also have, for example, Lyme disease, which is a disease spread by ticks, okay? So dengue is a risk over here, which is, quite common in Southeast Asia. But in places like Indonesia and so on, which we'll get more of, is that in places that are higher altitude on the mountains, where before there used to be no dengue, for example, now it will be spreading over there. So how will, where before the sound of a mosquito would have maybe made you feel annoyed a bit, now it might be a disease coming your way. So this is a very important to think about. How will this affect our health, our well-being, but also our mental health as a consequence? These are called vector-borne diseases, right? Where the changes that we're seeing basically help improve the likelihood of a mosquito surviving, for example, and that's spreading disease. Indonesia is at risk of tropical diseases as well. Malaria threat resurfaces due to climate change and COVID-19. So as we know right now, Indonesia is going through a massive campaign to eradicate malaria, but it is now that effect might actually be a losing battle because climate change makes it much easier for mosquitoes to spread. Okay. And now we come to the diffuse effects, the tertiary effects. Right? And here we're going to look at how mental health. And then after that, we're going to talk about possible solutions, possible ways on how we, as healthcarers and also psychologists, can also help the communities we're working with. So we've talked about big changes in our demographics, in our land, in our environmental impacts, economic activity, etc. And the question we'll be asking ourselves is, how is this going, both in terms of mental health and also other ways? So, for example, migration. Okay, as sea levels rise and weather becomes increasingly erratic, millions of people will be in the move in the coming decades. Okay, so we can see in Indonesia, rainy season and floods in 2016 led to almost 1 million people being displaced. Okay, in India, we had just 2016. Okay, in India, we have the Bihar floods that year. In Cuba, we had hurricanes. In China, we had floods, and this year we had droughts. Okay, so we're seeing how these effects, these climate change events, can lead to displacement of millions of people. How will this affect the populations? You can imagine the mental health trauma of having to leave your home, leave your community, and start afresh somewhere else. Not to mention then the problems, because they're refugees and people treat refugees with disdain, etc., etc. So there are lots of these problems that happen. In fact, by 2050, if no action is taken, it's only 27 years away. By 2050, if no action is taken, there will be more than 143 million internal climate migrants across the 3 regions: Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. Okay? What is going to happen in Bangladesh when millions of people lose their land because of sea level rise? You think they're going to stay in the sea? No, they're going to move to the cities or maybe to other countries. That will lead to ethnic tensions. Okay, the drivers of migration, you have an influence on environmental changes on the drivers that lead to a decision that finally, this is an interesting psychological model to use over here to look at. You've got environmental changes that have an effect on the people to make them finally decide to leave or to stay. Okay, so this is something interesting to examine. Conflict, economic problem, environmental problems, social factors all feed into drivers of conflict, such as institutional context, okay, which you will have an institutional context of weak governance, failing institutions, etc. These, the drivers of conflict, lead to increased risk of tensions and conflicts. Okay, it's a bit of a stretch perhaps, but there was quite a bit of evidence that the civil war in Syria was partly due to climate change. Because what happened was that you had hundreds of thousands of farmers affected by drought in eastern Syria. They migrated to the cities, but that led to ethnic tensions between people of the city and people who might just migrated. And that had sparked the civil war. I'm not saying that the civil war happened due to climate change. I'm saying that climate change contributed to the civil war, to the way it works. Okay. And this is, in fact, we have this flow chart here. Local temperatures increase, leading to rising disasters, migration and displacement, leading to tensions. Then you've got resource scarce, leading The mental health impacts. Do not underestimate the mental health impacts. People might not necessarily make the link to climate change, but they will know when their home is gone. They will know when the temperatures are hotter than usual and it affects them. Okay. Think also of the mental health effects of our communities, of our cities, There's deforestation going on, for example. I find it very alarming, for example, that in Indonesia, they plan to build a city in Borneo. I understand the need, but at the same time, entire forests will be destroyed. How will that affect the communities over there, the indigenous people who've been there for thousands of years, and then to see their forests destroyed? How would it affect them? Think also of young people. They're being brought up with climate change. I mean, it's distressing enough for us here in this lecture, but think of young people constantly hearing about how climate change is going to affect them. Think about the psychology of how it happens. In parts of Europe, and this sounds extreme, but in parts of Europe, many young people are saying, "Oh, I don't want to have children. Why do I want to bring children in this world?" So this is the psychological effect we're having. Okay. Climate change, there's a really nice chart here from Climate Central. That is a very good source, by the way, Climate Central, go look at it, okay? So you have vulnerability, prior illness, gender, age, inequities, occupation, for example. You have exposure, injury, displacement, job loss, observing negative impacts. And all these increase mental health risks. We're talking about people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder because of the effect of climate change on their communities, okay? Depression, suicide, remember those farmers in India? Okay. We have reduced well-being, there's added stress, there's climate anxiety, This can be in every shape or form. You get places, even in the richest people in the world, in the US, for example, people in Florida, who have these big villas by the sea, Miami Beach and so on. They're not how is it going to affect them? Okay, fine. They might have another 50 homes, But what if you're someone who always lived there and you're not getting insurance? What if the people in some communities around the world are not getting insurance because of sea level rise? How will this affect them? Think of flooding, think of drought, all these things, all of them have a strong effect on our climate, on our mental health. We have loss of culture, loss of community. We have what is now called eco-anxiety. I am anxious because of the destruction of our ecology, of our environment. Okay, lack of hope in the future. That's why we see all these young people going out on the streets doing climate strikes. It's not a white people thing, it's a global thing. We all need to go out in the streets. We're going to talk about this soon. And inability to plan ahead. Okay, we get changes in physical health, changes in our mental health, which leads to problems such as substance abuse, tension in relationships, anxiety, depression, etc., and community health problems. Because, of course, let's say your clinic is destroyed. Where are you going to get your health access, for example? I'll give you an example. When I was in Kiribati, the place I was living in, it was a two-story house. The top floor was where I was living. The bottom floor was a clinic, a small clinic. One day, the sea level rose so much that it flooded the whole clinic. They had to throw away everything. The mattress, the bed, all the medication, all the diagnostic tests, all of it, because it was contaminated with seawater. So imagine how it would feel for the people over there saying, my God, I've lost all these things. And then people wanting to go to the clinic to get treated, and they can't because it's all washed away. So there are all these things to think of. Climate anxiety is increasing around the world, okay? And as I say, it's not just as they say, a white child problem. This is a global problem, How worried are you about climate change? Young people, 10,000 people surveyed. This is a paper in Nature, by the way, a very highly reputable journal, okay? 10,000 people were interviewed. 27% were extremely worried, okay? We're talking about people saying climate change makes me feel sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, very powerless, okay, guilty, and others say optimistic or indifferent. Optimistic because some people have the attitude of climate change might actually bring changes that we need. okay? Because people will act to stop it. I'm going to talk about this. Generation dread. Dread is the horror of you're afraid of something, you're dreading it, okay? However, there's more literature these days on finding purpose in an age of climate crisis. You know, when there's a crisis, there's also an opportunity. Okay, we need to tell ourselves this is a crisis, it's depressing, it's dangerous, but we have an opportunity through climate change to address many of the problems we've been facing all this time. Okay? Points to consider and reflect on. Being born into a world where things will probably get much worse can be very difficult to deal with. I have been aware of climate change since I was a little child, and trust me, it's affected me a lot. You know, in my case, it inspired me a lot to act, but there are days when I feel very depressed, when I don't want to think about it. Okay, people feel disempowered, frustrated, especially with politicians for failing to deliver. Okay, I talk to ministers in my country. It's a small country, don't be impressed, but I talk to ministers in my country, and you realize they have no idea how to solve the problem as of them, or they don't understand the problem. Okay, it's very interesting. The changes needed are many, urgent, and radical. Okay, but the beauty of it, and we're going to get a bit into more of these now, is that the changes that we need are actually going to benefit everybody. Okay, not to just deal with climate change, they benefit everybody in every way. So, in summary, it is easy to feel let down and depressed about climate change. Our task as psychologists and mental health specialists is to turn that despair into hope and to inspire others to change. That is my belief. I really think, and in fact, I found it even in the scientific articles I was reading, they tell you to turn that anger into action. Okay? We are still in time to make the necessary changes to mitigate climate change. When we say we're heading towards 2.7, it doesn't mean we will reach 2.7 degrees centigrade. We do nothing, we will reach 2.7 degrees centigrade. Okay, so we need to be actors in this change. Okay, at this point, some adaptation will be necessary. Okay, even if we remove all the carbon dioxide that humans have put in since 1950, the Earth will remain warm for thousands of years because the warming is locked in. Okay, so we still need to make some adaptation changes, but we can stop it from getting much worse, and in the meantime, solve lots of the problems we're already facing. The way forward. Okay, we need to think of the way forward. We need to think, okay, we have this problem. It's depressing. It makes me feel terrible. How can I change my society? How can I change my community from the small to the big? How can I affect policy decisions? Okay, this is the way forward. How can I inspire my clients to act, you know, rather than sit down or just complain about things? From helplessness to action, options for difficult times. Okay, in 2019, we saw many climate strikes happen, but then unfortunately the pandemic stopped a lot of them, but there was a lot of focus on climate action. Okay, and there still is a lot. There's a lot going on in the world still about this. Okay. I just noticed someone asked a question. Let's perhaps leave the questions to the end, please, so that we'll have a good discussion. I'd love to hear more from you about all this. So the good news, as I said, a crisis is also an opportunity. The changes we need to implement to mitigate climate change and adapt to it have real, tangible benefits to improve our health, strengthen our communities, and enhance our general well-being. Okay? So if we see climate change so let me give you a very simple example. Okay? We all know that cars burn fossil fuels, that lead to pollution, that lead to climate change. Okay? There's also air pollution. So if I try to remove the use of cars, maybe through getting cycling lanes, improving public transport, okay, making it harder for people to use cars, but offering them good alternatives, we're not only reducing air pollution, but we're not only reducing climate change and carbon emissions, but also reducing air pollution. That will have a net benefit on our communities. No, there are many, many examples of this. We should be inspired by this crisis to speak out, act, and intervene. Okay. In fact, there's this particular cartoon that I'm a bit fond of over there. So Unfortunately, it's not a hoax, guys. Climate change is real. Okay, but here it says, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Okay, and the point of this is that what I want to show, look at that list over there. Energy independence, preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water, healthy children, etc. Okay, so many of the changes that we'd like to bring about in our communities are also climate friendly. You know, so we can use climate change. People are depressed about climate change. We tell them, look, is there something else that is annoying you? They say, yes, my God, the traffic is so bad. Work on improving traffic, on removing cars, on getting buses, getting people to cycle, improving the infrastructure in our cities. That forest they want to chop down, fight for it, preserve it. That we can work on. So even if it wasn't because of climate change, they'd be beneficial, let alone with climate change in the problem. Okay. In public health, we talk a lot of these. We have a lot of strategies about this. So I want to just show you some examples just to set you thinking. Okay. Basically, before the 1960s, look at the chart to the right over there. You had cheap, abundant energy and food produced within a benign climate. Okay. So undisrupted climate. You have technology, healthcare, we've got gains in life expectancy. Now, we have two worlds we can build. One of them is of the sustainability transition. Okay, greater equity, more physical activity, better food production and choice, and just a marginal rise of energy and food prices, and a slightly less favorable climate, because as I said, some things are locked in. Or we're going to have a non-sustainable life, excessive food, what we're seeing a lot of today, okay, declining nutrition, etc., and much higher energy and food prices, and a far less favorable climate. So basically, we're saying, if we let things go on as they are, things will only get worse. But if we decide to act, things can get much better, despite of climate change. And I really believe it is our role to transform anger and despair into action. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Okay, I won't go into details over here, but basically here are some examples of public health of how we can tackle climate change problems. Okay. Health co-benefits of co-mitigation should not be underestimated. I'll give you that other example. If there's problem with air transport, there's too much traffic, it causes stress and anxiety, low work productivity, whatever. Air pollution and carbon emissions. So let's tackle it from a climate change perspective. We reduce carbon emissions because we're solving air traffic. In the meantime, there's far less traffic, people are less anxious, there's better air to breathe, it's a better quality of life. What's there to miss? What are we going to lose? What we're going to lose is spending hours in a metal cage banging on our steering wheel. That's what we're going to lose. Do we miss it? No, we shouldn't. And that's the beauty of the public, of using a public health perspective, a mental health perspective in tackling climate change. Because we see the links so clearly, and our politicians don't, but we see them clearly. And we need to push for that change. Okay? In fact, here's an interesting chart over here, just a framework. Okay? Disease burden, and then we have a timeline. Okay? So currently, things are getting worse, as we can see over here. Mitigation begins. Now, imagine we start mitigating these problems. We start, for example, health impact averted by mitigation. We start reducing our carbon emissions, so problems that we could have forecast are actually less than we thought. We have our health impact is avoided via adaptation. We adapt to the climate problems we have. So, for example, protecting our crops more or using better crops, and therefore we lower our health impact. We have health co-benefits of mitigation. So all these things play together, and we can therefore improve our situation. There's this thing called BRACE, building resilience against climate effects. Okay, so the way it works is we forecast the problem. Look at number 1 over here. We project the disease burden. We expect 1 million cases of dengue more per year. We assess public health interventions. Perhaps we need to both mitigate but also adapt to this problem. We develop and implement climate and health adaptation plan. We evaluate the impact and improving quality of activities. And we start again. Okay, so we can choose our sphere and use brace as a model to work with. Changing norms. There's that guy over there with the stick person with the domino, because we never know what impacts our actions will have. Speaking out. In 2018, a student with autism in Sweden decided not to go to school on a Friday and sat down in front of Parliament demanding action on climate change. Who cares? He inspired millions of people to act. Millions. You know, Greta Thunberg, fine, she was the white person, but there's so many more. Look here. There's, for example, Valerie from Uganda. She is a great climate activist. For example, we have over here all these Indonesian people over here. You can see here they're protesting about climate change. Why not inspire people to speak out? You know, look at the face of this elderly lady in Kiribati. I love this photo. She's resolute. Her coconut tree has fallen into the sea because of coastal erosion, but she is standing proud. It's like that person, Palanisa Alofa. In the video I showed you, I worked with Palanisa Alofa, and she's an inspiring person, a very inspiring person. And she moves people to action. We can be those people too. I want to show you an example from my hometown. So this is my hometown, Marsascala. Okay, it's a bay, basically, an inlet with lots of fishing boats and lots of people living around. Okay, so in August 2021, we received a bombshell. Basically, we were told that there are plans to turn it into a giant yacht marina. Okay, some people would say, what's wrong with a yacht marina? It brings money. But a yacht marina brings climate emissions, carbon emissions, destroys the seabed, destroys the community forever. Okay, because it changes the community. Where will people park? Where will people, stay? Where will people be able to enjoy the sea anymore? They can't swim anymore. Because it's polluted. All these problems. So what happened? What we did was we rallied local citizens to join the dots between how highly polluting marina would affect their way of life. And trust me, it was not easy. Okay, you can see the bay over there. They wanted to literally build the marina all over it. You can see it over there in red. Okay, I work with an NGO over here. So we started a campaign. We started reaching out to the community. We'd go to the people in the community, the mayors, the people leading the local village festa, which is a very important cultural event in Malta. We spoke to people who take care of the sea, the marine biologists. We spoke to people in schools. We spoke to politicians who went, trust me, I had meetings with them. They're very depressing, but they need to be done, And what happened? In Malta, we do not have a culture of protest. Okay, people are very lazy. They complain a lot, but they don't protest. Okay, and what we did was we managed to get hundreds of people to protest every time, which for Malta is a big thing. Okay, this is a small town. And the beauty of it is that while climate change might not have been the thing I spoke about climate change, but people don't really connect with such a big problem. But people do connect with, I will not be able to go and swim. The sea will be polluted. Where shall I park my car? I will no longer have the quiet home I wanted. People connect with that. And these are all angles to tackle on the climate problem. Okay. And the beauty of it, we stopped it. It took a long time, but we stopped it. The bay was safe from overdevelopment after a long, hard campaign that involved thousands of people. And that's fun, honestly. You get different tactics. For example, we started putting stickers on our doors. It was election time. So politicians in Malta come and knock doors to say, hello, what do you need? So what we did was we put stickers on our doors. If you support the marina, don't bother coming in. We're not going to vote for you. Okay. We started making fun protests. One of them was a swimming protest. We all went swimming in the sea, just to show that we actually want to enjoy the day. Okay. And all these things, and the beauty of it is that it inspired so many people that a local NGO was formed called the Marsascala Residents Network. I'm part of it. And basically what we're doing over here is that local citizens are acting together for the public good. None of us earn a single cent. We do it out of voluntary work. But this is the kind of inspiring action that we need. It is a win. Once you win, it becomes contagious, you know. And this is where norm activation theory comes in. Okay, so you have your personal values, biospheric and altruistic values, for example, over here. This is adapted to climate change. You are aware of the consequences. You have cognitive and affective knowledge. Ascription of responsibility. I am partly responsible for this. Efficacy belief, self-efficacy and outcome efficacy. Okay, and then we get social factors, social norms and perceived group values. All this feed into a change in personal norms, which can lead to mitigative actions. Okay. So basically, I want to aspire back to the pandemic. Remember, in the pandemic, we used to say, wash your hands. Okay, for all that time, you know, if you cough, don't go out, or be careful how you sneeze. Let's take care of our elderly. Let's stay distant if we can. Okay, wipe the surfaces after you use them and all these things. That is a case of a norm activation theory. So why can't we do the same for climate change? Why can't we inspire people to change? Okay, if we manage to spend all that time inside, you know, and if we manage to change the way our society works for while it was our way, not do it with climate change. People are inspired by day-to-day actions and conversations. Okay, normalizing action may be what we need to mobilize people in the streets. We need to normalize actions. Okay, and let's not be afraid of being civilly disobedient. I'm not saying violence here. I'm talking civilly disobedient. Okay, in the UK, they do a lot of this. The Extinction Rebellion, for example, would block a road because of climate change. Okay, it annoyed many people, and the fact they're rethinking their strategy. But my point is that we need to normalize these actions. We need to show our anger, express it. Okay, speak out. Awareness is not enough. You know, they tell us, oh, we need to make people aware. We're bringing up a generation of young people who are depressed because their world is going to be terrible. That's what awareness does on its own. Okay, enough with awareness. People are aware of climate change and all the problems that it causes, and if not of climate change per se, they're aware of the problem. In Kiribati, people might not have been able to tell me this is because of climate change, but they did join the dots. They have a word for it. I'll translate it into the big change happening around us. That's what they call it, because they see sea level rise, fruit is getting smaller, etc. They want to act on it. Okay, we need to go out there, talking to people in the street, to our neighbors, colleagues, and discuss issues. We need to be cognizant of cultural issues. Okay, so for example, in Malta, I'm in a campaign to start reducing car use. It's very difficult because cars are seen as a status symbol over here, but we're not going, you know, so we work with that in mind. It doesn't mean we're not going to change it. It means that we need to be aware that it's going to be a bit harder. Okay, same thing with eating meat. Eating meat is a cultural thing for many people. You know, we need to reduce our meat intake, not increase it. Okay, but at the same time, we need to be aware that it's going to be hard. It doesn't mean that we should give up. Here's another video. Let me see if the sound works, please. If not, I will do the same thing with YouTube. Okay.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
Everything counts. What you do counts.
Are you there?
Sometimes, can you hear me? Sorry,
Yes, yes.
the internet connection I think is a bit unstable at times. I'm sorry about that.
It should be fine.
Okay, so I think you've seen over there how many actions we can do. You know, there's so much we can do, and you know, I really have an appeal to all of you. Indonesia is such an important place for the world. You have so much biodiversity. You have the most beautiful rainforests, coral reefs, mountains, culture. It's just amazing, you know. It's a country I've always wanted to visit, and I hope I will. But my point is this: you have so much work that you can do, and you know, it's one of the biggest economies in the world. You have one of the biggest populations in the world. Okay, so this is a very important time for you to think about what you can do, from the small to the very large. You can think about policy change. For example, you can think about how can I inspire my local community to do things differently. We might need to change. Think about it. You know, so many of us get stuck in cars and traffic when we can use a bus. Okay, think about the rainforests, you know, in Indonesia. You know, I really hope that they will not destroy most of the rainforest in Borneo now when they build that new capital city. It's heartbreaking, you know. Think about how, you know, that was an easy way of solving the problem. You know, I mean, I don't want to be overly critical to your government, but I'm critical to all governments, as my friends can attest to. But you know, if they're going to move their capital city because they can't handle Jakarta, I think that seems like running away from a problem to me. You know, so perhaps we need to think of Jakarta as, how can I solve Jakarta? How can I solve the problems there? You know, maybe the groundwater is being depleted so fast. We need to stop that. How do I talk to people? How do I reach out and speak out to people about these things? There's so much that we can do. So much that we can do. And I really think that sitting down and just saying, oh, it's something too big is just not an option. Because, you know, it sounds like an effort, but it actually can be a lot of fun, I promise you. It's something beautiful that we're no longer, when you're no longer obsessed by money and you think about how can I improve my community, it really makes things so much nicer in your life. You know, look at the examples here. So these are all examples. Okay, you've got people collecting waste. You know, we've got all these. First of all, there's a ecosystem. Sorry, the didn't come fully completely over there, but ecosystem is a clean tech startup being proposed in Indonesia, for example. One thing I had once pointed this to you, Mr. Ika, when we were in. Yeah, I was invited to a festivity in Indonesia, for example, and you know, everything comes in these tiny little sachets which you open, drop, and then you throw away. Do you know that those remain for hundreds of years in the environment? You get 2 seconds of satisfaction, they remain hundreds of years. You know, is that responsible? We see them here as well. I'm constantly railing against them, you know? So it's our duty to speak out against these things, which we take for granted. They're convenient, but they're causing lots of harm. And, you know, our ancestors were dying of hunger because they didn't have little plastic sachets to put their soy sauce or whatever. But this is a way of how we deal with these problems. Okay. Possible actions in Indonesia. Help people join the dots between climate change and their daily lives. Because once people realize they're part of the problem, they also realize they can be part of the solution. Okay. If people are depressed about this problem, inspire them into action. There is so much to do that can be very satisfying. Change needs to happen from the micro to the macro scale. Okay, talk to your colleagues, but also to policymakers. It needs to happen at every level. Don't be afraid. You know, fun fact, big secret, they are as clueless as they seem. Okay, and it is our task to tell them this and to encourage them. Those are basically my references. You can see them later on, and thank you for your time. I will now be very happy to have a discussion and questions with you.
Okay, thank you so much, John, for the inspiring presentation. So without further delay, I would like to invite as many as participants to ask their question. If there's any, just to put your question on the comment box. You can say it in Bahasa Indonesia or in English, whichever's comfortable for you. Or maybe you can raise your hand, so it's really okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask to John?
Don't be afraid, I don't bite.
I think maybe someone is typing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think before while we are waiting for some student or participant to ask, maybe I have maybe not a question or something, but it's probably because you already mentioned about the new capital city of Indonesia that is just currently in the process of being moved to the Borneo Island. From your perspective itself, have you heard that similar example from diverse or from different country that actually have done a similar step as well by moving their capital city, and what's something that probably we as Indonesian citizens have to anticipate by having our new capital city in the new place, kind of that, like.
So one.
John, I think you're muted.
So I think it's the internet connection, maybe. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So one example that comes to mind is Brazil. So Brazil in the 1960s moved their capital from, I believe it was Sao Paulo to Brasilia. Brasilia is way inland in Brazil. Okay, so it was in the rainforest. And unfortunately, you know, it caused a lot of harm over there because, of course, you're cutting down the rainforest, the indigenous people were kicked out, and it caused all these problems. So I think it's really important that while Indonesia is committed to doing this, to really make sure that things are done properly. You know, that indigenous people are not being kicked out, you know, that they're involved as stakeholders in their community, and also that as much of the forest is preserved. What usually happens is a road starts being built, and then people start building along that road, and then the road goes into the forest, and etc., etc., etc. So you get all these problems. Another thing to be aware of is greenwashing. So what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is I'm going to build a big polluting factory, but I'm going to put a solar panel on top, so everything will be fine. Okay, it's very important not to allow that to happen, because the fact is that if you're cutting down a tree, you're not just cutting down a tree, you're cutting down a living being, but not just that, it's an entire ecosystem with it, hundreds of years old. So we really need to ensure that the spaces that are built in the city are environmentally friendly, that perhaps there are policies that can really benefit the people there, and that, for example, they make it a plastic-free zone. All these things, come to play. Any questions so far? I think you're muted.
Okay, so I think it's very good opportunity for everyone who really curious about the impact of climate change to our health and mental health in general. So is there anyone who would like to ask a question or so? Please don't be shy. You can ask in Bahasa Indonesia, and I can help translate your question. Or maybe
afraid of me. I was a student like yourself a few years ago, so we can talk as colleagues and people who want to make the world better.
Okay. Or maybe there's someone raised their hand. Just I couldn't see. Maybe
before someone raised their hand during the discussion.
Yeah. Or maybe.
Okay. Okay, John.
Hi.
Okay. See you again. Okay. Sorry, I'm late because previously I have another job in 11th floor, another floor. So maybe someone have asked the same question before, but maybe I will try to accommodate my class. So this almost all of the participants is from my class, are from my class social intervention. Now, in the class of social intervention, I have give them tasks to assess and give little intervention to some communities, some different communities in Jakarta. And what I want to ask is that possible for any communities, any kind of communities to enhance or empower their member, their societies, to act the pro-environmental behaviors, something like that, to anticipate the climate change in Jakarta. So is it possible for any kind of communities, like maybe like motherhood in village motherhood, or maybe the adolescents, a group of adolescents, and maybe about the lower from the lower socio-economic status. Is that possible?
So in Malta, we have the NGO sector, the non-governmental organization sector, and usually they would be looking with someone who works on forests, someone who works on fishing, someone who works on whatever. Okay, so what I did and what many people do is that if they want to dedicate their time to this, they work with an NGO, and the idea here is to bring about policy change usually. Okay, so for example, I work with an NGO which works many different sectors. Climate change is just one of them. But for example, today in the afternoon, I'll be going to join the climate strike. Today we're going to do a climate strike I'm going with my bike, for example. I got permission from work to leave an hour early, so I will go join it because I'm quite a climate activist here in Malta, so I kind of need to be there. But my point is this: it is very possible. And sometimes it can work in any way. Sometimes you can work with an NGO, sometimes you can do it on your own. But sometimes it starts with talking to your neighbor, to your friend, and say, I'm really worried about this. Let's do something about it. Let's do something. How do we do something about it? You sit down, you start writing down plans, and then you start talking to this person, talking to that person, and so on. And it's not about raising awareness. Awareness is just a very small part of it. It's about actually pushing for change. So let me give you an example. This has nothing to do with climate change, but it caused a big change in Malta. So Malta has a small island called Comino. And nobody lives on it except one person. There's a hotel. And then there's this bay called Blue Lagoon. And it's full of tourists. They put so many sunbeds. Let me give you a silly example. There are so many sunbeds on what is a public beach that you can't even sit down anywhere. You have to buy a sunbed. So if you're a Maltese person, you go there, but you have to use a sunbed for the day to sit on it, to be able to enjoy the beach. And that we consider that very unfair. So we organized an event with 50 other people. It was very secret. And we just literally turned up on the other side of the island one morning before people started arriving. We walked with a big banner saying Comino belongs what the law says, okay? We walked down and we closed all the deck chairs and we filmed it. We got the media to film and everything. And it inspired a huge change. Many people were inspired. They wanted to join our NGO because they had had enough. And they said, you have the guts to speak out when you need to. This is incredible, And we pressured the government a lot. And we just had a meeting with the minister a few days ago, and they told us that they're going to make big changes to the way the Blue Lagoon Bay works this year. So what is that? It is an action where people were complaining for years and years and years. But then you make an action that is symbolic and powerful, and people understand it, It wasn't violent. We closed the deck chairs. It's a very silly thing. But it inspired people to act. And that's what the kind of thing we need to do. We need to not just recognize that there's a problem, but act on it. We are citizens in a country. We're doing this for the good of the community. Yes, there are other interests, and it's a threat. So, for example, the second time we did a protest, they got some bullies to scare us. But we're a much bigger crowd. That's the beauty of it. So they couldn't do anything to us. So it's a matter of really being strategic and thinking forward on how to inspire change.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh yeah. So it may even be inspired even by the small number of the community's member. Yeah. I think
exactly.
Just act. Yeah. Also, it's a plan. It's a plan is for you. Plan is important or not?
So the plan is very important. Yes, it's important. So let me tell you, you need to plan, but the biggest problem is that you can't stay running around the plan all the time. Sometimes you could. So, for example, the way we do it with the NGO I work with is, let's say an issue that is worrying. For example, Malta have a lot of car traffic and it's causing lots of deaths and it's polluting, etc. So what we're doing is we started with a banner. We painted a banner, we hung it during traffic hours over a big flyover, basically demanding that enough with the cars, for example. The next step is we sent an open letter to the minister. We told them this is not one, we need to change things. The next step is that in 2 weeks' time, we're organizing a lie-in. So we're going in front of Parliament and people sitting on the ground, basically symbolizing all the people lying on the ground, imitating all the people who died last year. And we're going to paint it like the government is failing us. They're making our roads unsafe. They're pushing core cars too much, etc., etc. In a month's time, then we'll write another letter demanding changes. The minister we already know, will probably not reply. Okay. Then we're going to do what is going to be a bit more direct. We're planning to get, they're not watching me, so I can share it with you. We're going to get about 100 people. Inside the parliament. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Politicians park outside the parliament. So basically, as they're leaving, we'll be with bikes ringing bells, ring, 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 and demanding change and shouting at them. And the idea is to insist and bring it to them that they are failing us. Okay, and you have to really target who you're going to target. We could go to the transport authority, but the transport authority does what the politician tells them, right? So if we complain to them, it's a waste of time. So you have to go to the policymakers, which are in Malta's case, the politicians. So you need to really plan, but you have set dates. You set a date, on that day we're going to do this, and we need to do this, 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 and this. Realistic date, you need to just make sure you have people filming, make sure you have the press attending, make sure you have the, so it's about organizing, how to make it effective. And it works, it really works.
Yeah.
Same thing we did with Marsa Scala when we stopped the Marina, for example. We had lots of plans and press conferences, and we got speakers, from the community to speak. It's very important. Okay, we need to hear from the community. Speak out, they get the media, they get film, live stream, even with TikTok and other social media apps. Okay, then it goes viral because it's something different, something exciting. It's not people complaining on a social media post on Facebook and going away. It's actually people coming out in the street. And that inspires others. I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there is one of the students who would like to ask a question to you. So
of course, please.
Ya, silakan teman-teman dari yang mau bertanya, bisa bahasa Indonesia aja mungkin.
Silakan Fadia, silakan.
Okay. All right. Thank you for this opportunity. So good afternoon, Mr. John.
Good afternoon.
I am Shiva. Okay, I am Shiva, a sixth semester college student from Faculty of Psychology. So I have a question regarding to Indonesia that are facing some climate change issues, especially Jakarta, that are predicted to be sinking soon. So actually, I realized that Indonesia, especially Jakarta, as a capital city, are still need a lot of adaptation to climate change condition, especially since there are already multiple issues that may affect this condition, as like poverty, quality of education, and maybe an insufficient information about this climate change. So if I'm not mistaken, like you said before, awareness is not enough. So my question is, what strategies or maybe a little action that can be implemented by a college student like me with all of these issues that are already happen in developing country, and what kind of education can be implemented in Indonesia? Especially like I said before, Indonesia are also facing multiple issues like the quality of education. And in my opinion, it also affect how someone or public processing an information. That's all from me. Thank you.
Those are very good. That's a very good question, Fadia. Thank you very much. So the first thing to do is not to be overwhelmed. There are so many problems that we can't save everything, in the sense that we can't solve everything. We can't say, oh my God, there's a traffic problem, there's a sea level rise problem, the seawall is broken, the education is bad, everything. There are problems in everything. So what you need to do, sit down and say, in my capacity, what am I really passionate about? For example, if traffic frustrates you, maybe you want to work on the traffic issue. If sea level rise and destruction of communities affects you, that might be the thing that inspires you. So you sit down, and what you can do is, the first thing you do is reach out. So for example, with Marsa Scala, okay, I live there, but I went and reached out to the fishermen, for example. I went to talk to them, just a normal conversation. To ask them, how are you feeling about this? And they tell you, oh, it's this problem, it's that problem, and so on. Okay, then you go home, you share with your colleagues, with your friends, with fellow students who might want to be inspired to do action. You write these points down, and then you say, okay, we're having a target here. For example, there might be a community in Jakarta that is constantly flooded because of sea level rise. Their seawall is broken and the government might be ignoring them. So you say, okay, how can I bring this more into prominence? You might have friends in the media who might want to come and film it and show it on the news. You might want to talk to the community to inspire them to protest, get them all out, tell them, if you're all sitting here complaining individually, it's understandable, but it's not enough. You need to work together. So get them, come, let's go and protest, I am finding a big challenge like this, for example, working with farmers in Malta. Farmers in Malta are very defeatist. They're like, oh, there's nothing we can do. And we're trying hard to bring them to speak out. It's very difficult. Okay. But when it comes to other communities, it was much easier, really, because they might not be very educated, but they do recognize the problem, and this is where we need to come in. This is where we need to inspire others. So my advice to you is choose the problem that you want to address, outreach to it, try to understand what the problem is, encourage the people to speak out with friends, don't do it alone. And then things will kind of roll on their own accord. We'll start sort of fitting, okay, here. Is that bringing awareness is not enough, because I'm telling you, so I made you very aware about climate change. It doesn't solve the problem. We need to act, and that's where we come in. I'm hoping I have answered your question, Fadia, but basically it is, don't do things alone and don't be discouraged, because what you're trying to do is very difficult, but when it works, it's a beautiful thing, So try to choose one problem at a time. For example, the NGO I work with, we have many working groups. So it's a big NGO. We have many working groups. Some of us focus on transport. Some of us focus on public access. Some of us focus on workers' rights, etc., etc., etc. Some people participate in different working groups, but we all have our way of doing things. Okay, and we discuss them together in the larger group. That's how, so that we learn from each other as well. Don't be afraid of learning from experts abroad or other NGOs within Indonesia, for example, because there's no need to reinvent everything. There are books, entire philosophies written on this, so you can look at them.
Okay, thank you, John, and thank you, Fadia, for the question. I think we have one last question probably from Gaiska, because Gaiska just raised her hand. You're muted. Okay, please, Gaiska.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Gaiska Nitana Masukma. I'm a freshman, actually. I'm not from this class, but I'm glad that I have the opportunity to join this class. My question is, for me, changing plastic to a paper bag that is environment friendly is cost a lot of money, because many products that environmental friendly is a lot expensive than the plastic. Yeah. I would like to ask, is there any alternative for us to change our way of living, like using plastic, that a lot cheaper way that not cost a lot of money to.
If you give me 10 seconds, I can show you an example right here. Give me a second.
John.
This is an example. Okay, so you go to a supermarket. Sorry, because of the blur, it's not showing.
Yes.
Okay, but it's basically a permanent shopping bag. Okay, so one of the problems is you go to a supermarket or to a grocer, and they give you everything in plastic bags. It's okay to tell them, no, thank you, I don't need to. And then you can tell them, for the environment, you can tell them these things. Okay, these bags are reusable for a very long time. Think of how our grandparents or our parents lived without plastic. How did they manage? They managed because they didn't get this thing, which they get and throw away. They reuse their products. So that's how we need to think. And it's actually cheaper. Okay, I know they give plastic bags for free, but that comes at a cost to our environment. You need to think in terms of practical ways. You can come with bags, for example, when you go shopping. Also, though, on a higher note, it's good to demand policy change. Okay, so it's fine if I make my personal change, and that's great. Okay, but it might be time to go to maybe a minister. My God, I mean, with a nation of 250 million people, it might be scary, but send an email to a department and tell them, why are we not dealing with this problem? You might organize a strike, a protest about this. Ask a minister. Let me give you an example. You take a social media video that goes viral. Okay, take a social media video next to one of those canals with lots of plastic thrown in, and you ask the minister, when are you going to come to solve this problem? Why aren't you here? Where are you? Why are you running away from the problem? Okay, sometimes it's good to make it personal that way. Sometimes it's good to put them, we elect them, and they pollute our country. Okay, so you need to tell them, demand change from them. One person that probably laugh, but if this thing goes viral and the trend starts, and tens of millions of people start protesting about this, or tens of millions of people start demanding change, what can happen? They will have to change because they're embarrassed and they want to get re-elected. No. So there's all these things, and trust me, it can catch on in ways you don't know. When last year I had proposed closing lectures as an action to the NGO I worked with, we thought of it as a stunt. It's an easy thing to do, but it inspired so many people that it was infectious. So sometimes we need to think outside the box. And going back to the individual action, I know it can be overwhelming at times, but to see what the problem is, sometimes the problems are right in front of us. I think the wisdom of our grandparents, who lived in the world where plastics weren't thrown away every 2 seconds, okay, made a big difference. It can make a big difference if we live like them a bit. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat over here. My name is Zakia. I want to ask something about water. As we know, water is primary need for us, but we still use the water from the ground, and we know it can affect the land as the land decreases. What alternative could we do to keep our water supply secure and available for years? Okay, that's a very good question. So there's 3 ways of going around this problem. One of them is address the problem, and the problem is groundwater extraction. It's not being controlled. There might be people abusing this groundwater extraction. So one of them is to stop making the problem worse. Secondly, there are technologies around like sea desalination. Okay, now this is very energy intensive, so it needs to be done using solar power, for example. But in Malta, for example, we use desalination a lot. We get water from seawater, we extract, we remove the salt, and we use that water. But thirdly, and probably most efficiently, is rainwater catchment. Okay, so we've complained about floods, about how there's a lot of flooding and rain. What's happening to the water? Is it just going in our streets and straight to the sea? Or are we trying to capture it? Maybe we can engineer ways of capturing that water and retaining it, And this is very important. In Malta, Malta is a very dry country. We have systems to capture that water. In the past few decades, they have not been taking care of them, and that's a big problem. But those systems have been going on for centuries, where people retain their water behind dikes to slow the water flow, so it's captured by the soil, replenishing groundwater. So there are lots of ways to go about this, engineering ways. And another thing, the most obvious one, is reduce the water use. How much water is being wasted? We need to really think about these things, because I'll give you an example, a ridiculous one. In the United States, in California, where they have these big houses with all the lawns, okay? California is turning into a desert because they're getting all that water and wasting it on maintaining the lawn. A lawn, like that green surface, that is a waste of water. There are plants that grow without the need for so much water. Change your garden. Things like this. So sometimes we just need to think in practical ways. Okay, I have another question over here. So I don't know how long, I'd like to answer this question though. So it is, just found out there are climate change with climate depression. Yes, and it spreads quickly among our youths. My question is, what are the solutions and efforts to reduce the impact of climate depression, especially in this generation, that people can get depressed so easily? I think I've been saying it for a long time. You're depressed, change that into an opportunity. Act, do something fun. Be naughty, I could say, be civil disobedient. It's depressing, but hey, it can imagine a vision where Jakarta is a city with lots of bicycles, without so much traffic, where the trees are green, where the streets are much greener with trees, Imagine that vision. Keep with it and move, do everything you can to inspire it. I think that is our task. Mental health is a serious issue. And sometimes it has to do with a lack of meaning. What gives meaning in my life? And sometimes being an active citizen gives a lot of meaning in life. And I think we need to inspire our patients, our clients, and our friends and our family and young people to do so, to be active. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, I think it also probably the last question, I think, because yeah, I'm very happy that there are so many questions that is actually interesting. So John, just maybe I want to share a bit with my experience. Just recently, I started using public transportation, and I've been doing that for 2 months, and I think it is also good for us as the local citizen to start thinking about the personal benefit by changing our behavior. For example, it's very cheap in Indonesia. It's like on daily basis, I only have to spend like 7 cents. 7 cents for go back and forth from my home to the university. So it's actually a very small amount of money, and so I can spend my income, my salary, for something that I really like on the later in the future, such as maybe I can go further, I can go traveling. So I think it's probably for the young generation as well. I know it's very hard to change our behavior. For example, changing swapping a plastic bag into the reusable bag, but hey, let's think about the personal benefit we can actually get. Let's say for the financial benefit, maybe if we can really think about the climate benefit or the natural benefits, but at least we can think about what's the benefit for us as the person doing it in the daily basis. So I think, John, that's all for today. I was very impressed and was very inspired by the presentation. And I hope you can, I hope you don't mind if I share this presentation as well to my students and to the many community in here. And I think that's all. Yeah,
and you're very welcome to share my email address. If they want to ask questions and so on, they're very happy to reply.
Yeah, I think.
And on my end, thank you very much. And I really hope that, while I hope I've highlighted the problems with climate change, I also hope it inspires you to be more active, both for mental health reasons and also for the communities that we live in. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. So, saya kembalikan lagi kepada MC. Sorry, John, wait a minute. So the Arif asked me for photo session. Just wait a minute. So who will do the screenshot? Salsa probably.
Salsa bisa bantu nggak buat kita foto bersama dulu?
Oke, karena di sini ada 4 slide. Jadi untuk tiap slide tolong ditahan sebentar untuk posenya. Saya mulai dari slide pertama. 1, 2, 3.
Cheese.
Slide kedua.
Second slide.
1, 2. Oke, masih ada yang mau on cam. Baik, udah 1, 2, 3. Slide ketiga, maaf. Dan slide keempat. Karena slide ketiga dan keempat lebih banyak yang mematikan kameranya, jadi saya percepat saja.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih Salsa, thank you Salsa. So you can now close the event if you want, Salsa.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Inka atas kesediaannya menjadi moderator. Untuk peserta silahkan mengisi kembali Google Form presensi yang sudah tertera pada kolom chat Zoom. Kemudian untuk mengakhiri kegiatan ini, saya Salsa Paisvadia selaku Master of Ceremony pada kuliah umum siang hari ini pamit undur diri. Kami berharap dengan diselenggarakannya kegiatan kuliah umum ini mampu memberikan kebermanfaatan bagi seluruh peserta dan juga pembicara. Terima kasih kepada pembicara dan seluruh peserta yang berkenan mengikuti kegiatan ini dari awal